We're going to cover Klal Kuf Lamed in the Chayei Adam and the laws of Pesach. We're going to cover chapter 130 about the laws of the Seder on the night of Pesach. This will be a quick rundown from the Chayei Adam about the rules of the Pesach Seder. He begins in Halacha Aleph. We have discussed that every single Jewish person is obligated to eat matzah that has been watched for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah, and that matzah that is then baked into matzos is acceptable for the night of Pesach, and that requirement is from the Torah. Therefore, it's imperative that a person eat one kazayas from that matzah. Upon that matzah, you make the bracha hamotzi. And you take one kazayas, meaning the volume of one olive, and you make that the matzah that you eat when you say the blessing of, we have been commanded to eat matzah. And that matzah upon which we were commanded to eat matzah is the broken middle matzah. After that, we take another kazayas, and we eat that with the maror, with the bitter herbs, which we will make into a wrap or sandwich. And after that, we will eat it again for the afikomen at the end of the meal. The reason for eating these three different zaysim, these three different olive size pieces of matzah, the first kazayas that we'll be eating is for the mitzvah of eating matzah, which is a Torah commandment. And that Torah commandment applies even in our days, because the Torah commands us, this is in Shemos 12:18, Be'erev tochlu matzos. On that evening, you will eat matzah. And the kazayas, which is used to make the sandwich with the maror, there is a dispute about what is written in the Torah concerning the Passover sacrifice itself, because it says there, in that same section, al matzos umurarim yocholuhu. You shall eat it with matzah and maror. So the rabbis of the Mishnah interpret that to mean that you have to eat them with the paschal offering itself, with the Passover offering. So you eat matzah by itself, and you eat maror by itself. Now, Hillel, the master Rav at the time, the head of the Sanhedrin, his opinion was that the Torah was telling us that all of them should be consumed together. And therefore, we make a remembrance of both the opinion of the rabbis, and we eat each one of them separately, meaning we eat the matzah by itself and the maror by itself. And then afterwards, we do a remembrance of the temple and the temple practice and follow Hillel's opinion as well, and therefore wrap them all together. The final kazayas comes for the afikoman, which is the dessert at the end of the meal, and this comes in place of the actual korban Pesach itself, because the Pesach was eaten at the very end. The offering itself was eaten at the very end. Therefore, you eat a kazayas of the afikoman matzah at the end. We mentioned the volume of a zayis, of an olive, is how much matzah you need to consume, and that volume is equivalent to half an egg. A person who is not feeling well can rely on those opinions who say that the size of an olive is 1/3 of the size of an egg. If this is not possible for him to eat half an egg, he can rely on this opinion. Someone who says that they're taking an oath to not eat matzah, and this would only apply to matzah that is eaten during the rest of the week. However, that also means that it would prohibit him from eating the matzah for the mitzvah as well. And such an oath would need to be removed in order to allow him to permit himself to eat the matzah on the night of the Seder. If a person takes an oath not to eat on the night of Pesach, this is considered a Shavuos Shav, a false oath. A person has violated a Torah commandment and is permitted to eat. If a person takes a vow against eating matzah, one must release himself from that vow. And the Mishnah Berurah adds here that he is compelled to do this in order that he may fulfill the mitzvah. So we compel people to perform the mitzvah. A note is the size mentioned over here of the zayis, according to the Chayei, is about 1 fluid ounce. That is the size of 1/2 of an egg, and that size is easily measured with a 1 ounce shot glass. One could go ahead and take the materials and put it into there and consume that. They could put matzah into there, they could put more into there to find out if they are eating enough of the item itself. And you must mush it down into the shape of that glass in order to eliminate any airspace, because we are dealing with the volume of the actual consumed product. Second halacha, someone who is not able to chew matzah, they could soak it in a little bit of water until it becomes somewhat soft. As long as it doesn't become completely broken up into little pieces and broken down in the water. And you definitely can't use wine, because wine would eliminate the flavor of the matzah. Nonetheless, someone who can't eat it even when it's been soaked in a little bit of water, one could still go ahead and try to soak it in wine or any other type of liquid. This leniency extends to an elder person or to a sick person or to someone else for whom it is very difficult for them to eat without turning it into something much softer. But any other person, if they were to try this on themselves, they do not fulfill the mitzvah of matzah by eating it when it has been soaked in either wine or other or other liquids. And even more so if it's been cooked down. And that's even if it was soaked in hot water in a second vessel, not cooked directly over a flame. Because there are those who say that even when it's put into a second utensil, it still cooks the matzah a little bit. And that's assuming the Mishnah Berurah says that water is also hot, whereby if you were to put your finger in it, it would jump out of the water. And so too, if it were cooked over the fire, definitely doesn't work, because cooked matzah is not permitted for the matzah of the mitzvah. One is allowed to go ahead and grind up matzah into little pieces, often referred to as matzah farfel, even if it's so fine that it looks like flour, which we call matzah meal. And you can still say hamotzi on that, as long as he gets the required kazayas we've mentioned previously, which, according to the Chayei, would be about 1 fluid ounce. Third halacha, every single Jewish person is obligated to eat a kazayas of maror, of bitter herbs, on both nights of Pesach at the beginning of the holiday. And this is a positive commandment that in our days has become only rabbinic because we don't have the Korban Pesach. We don't have the Passover offering. We still are required to be very strict and particular about not eating less than this, because everything for which we have been commanded to eat as a mitzvah should not be less than a zayis, the size of the volume of an olive. The best way to perform this mitzvah is by using lettuce, specifically romaine lettuce. If you do not have this type of lettuce, you can find another type, with preference going to the most preeminent one listed in the Mishnah, which is first and foremost the romaine. And then we're going to have different types after that, which are endive and iceberg and other types of bitter herbs, including the horseradish. However, since we are not so sure about what these actual things are called and if the names that we have for them are accurate, the bitter herb that is common to use in our countries is the one that we call in Yiddish chrein, which is the horseradish root mentioned in the Mishnah. However, someone who eats it when it is still whole, that is actually quite dangerous for them and is not really a mitzvah. Because of how sharp it is, it actually will hurt you more than allow you to perform the mitzvah. And furthermore, it makes it almost impossible to eat it because of how sharp it is in the size of a olive. So therefore, one should go ahead and rub the horseradish against a grater and leave it sitting uncovered a bit, because then the sharpness will go down a little bit. And such was the custom of the Vilna Gaon, the Garav of Rav Eliyahu Kramer Zatzal, was his custom to go ahead and grate it right before he before he came back from shul, in order to not lose all the flavor, because that would not allow you to fulfill the mitzvah. But you grate it a little bit in the daytime and leave it in the utensil to allow it to be prepared for the start of the Seder. And then you should spread it out on a plate, and by spreading it out, that will cause it to lose some of the sharpness and permit you to eat it. And when you take it, you should squeeze it down and make sure you have the kazayas. And then you can eat it easily. And so too, when you try to wrap matzah and maror together, you need to eat them each the size of one kazayas for each one, because we are eating them out of a doubt that maybe matzah and maror, that the matzah and the bitter herbs, we must follow the opinion of Hillel. And obviously, as we said, eating should be no less than the size of an olive. And again, this is the 1 ounce size. One who is concerned about eating the chrein, because it will be very dangerous, they can rely on the rabbi of Germany, formerly known as Chacham Tzvi, who testified that the vegetable that he called Helfslaten, which is romaine lettuce or iceberg lettuce, that is the lettuce that is mentioned in the Mishnah. And such have I heard from all those people who have come from the land of Israel, and they have referred to something eaten there called salatin as their bitter herb, which is the romaine lettuce. But they've said it on condition that they have very large leaves, and that the root is also quite large. But this isn't such an insane thing to assume, for in our own lands, we are only experiencing the very beginning of the produce production, and that's why our lettuces are much smaller. And this is also mentioned by the work, the Chok Yaakov, who said the same thing in the name of a person who lived in that land. And even though that lettuce is not really bitter at all, that's not the point. Because we say that the idea of it being really bitter is not the point. And the point is that it has to be something that is not sweet. I found also written in the work of the Lavush, he says, that there's this same lettuce is referred to as zerzich in Polish, and nonetheless, you have to squeeze down all of the lettuce in order to get the kazayas, because it's so big and spread out, and you shouldn't leave any space between them. And the chrein, the horseradish root, you should only take it from the middle part of the root, or the main shaft of the leaves, but you shouldn't take from the roots themselves that have split off from the main part of the root. The Mishnah Berurah adds over here that is the main part of it is that white center shaft, and that is where you should get it from, or from the leaves. Okay, and you only fulfill it with the actual main body of the horseradish fruit, but not from the roots that extend from it. You also are not allowed to leave the horseradish root soaked in water, because then it's considered pickled or immersed. And immersed or pickled horseradish is not acceptable for the mitzvah. The Mishmur points out that this is only a problem when it's soaked in vinegar. However, you should still be careful not to soak it in water. However, if there's nothing else to eat other than this one, you can go ahead and eat it, but you shouldn't do this you can do this with the leaves as well, and that will suffice as well if you don't have anything else that wasn't soaked. If you have neither one of these two, even if you eat something bitter, you should not make the blessing of al achilas mawar upon them, because only can fulfill the mitzvah with those things that were mentioned explicitly by the Torah, which are the ones mentioned in the Mishnah. If you don't chew the maror at all, but you swallow it whole, you also don't fulfill the mitzvah, because you need to taste the bitterness of the herb. However, swallowing matzah is okay, because even though by matzah you kind of need flavor of the matzah, that's why you aren't allowed to cook the matzah. It's a little different because when you cook it, the matzah itself loses the flavor of matzah. But if you swallow matzah, even though you aren't personally tasting the matzah, nonetheless, it's not losing its actual form and shape of actual matzah. The maror is slightly different because you have to actually taste the bitterness in your mouth, and so that's why you don't fulfill the obligation with it. Charoses is number 4 over here. Charoses is what you're going to dip the maror into. It's made from nuts and almonds and apples and cinnamon and ginger. It should be thick to remind you of the mortar that was used to build the buildings in Egypt. And when you have to dip the maror into it, you should pour a little wine into the charoses, or even a little vinegar. So that way it should be somewhat liquidy and allow you to dip in it. If Pesach falls out on Shabbos, you shouldn't put the wine into the charoses. Rather, you should put the charoses into the wine, because then you're turning the charoses into something thin. The Mishnah Berurah adds over here, then you also should not stir it with a spoon on Shabbos, rather with your finger, and it should be something thin. That's only for Shabbos. Halacha Hey. The vegetables that you can use for the initial dipping for karpas, in Ashkenazic countries, we take parsley, and there's different words for this, and some people take a little bit of onion for that. That is not really the best idea. Doesn't really have a green vegetable to it, but those are people who do that. Halacha Vav, there is a custom to place on the Seder plate both an egg and a lamb shank. You should roast both of them before Yom Tov. If you forgot to do that and roast them on Yom Tov, you have to eat from them on Yom Tov itself. But you can't eat from that night, because one is not allowed to eat something roasted on the night of Pesach. The egg, however, one can eat it that night, even if you have to cook it that day. There should be a little bit of meat on the shank bone, for if there was no meat, that's not considered a cooked food item. And the custom is you should have 2 cooked food items to remind us of the things that were eaten in the temple on this very night. One of them was the Chagiga offering, which was the common festival offering. And the other one, as we have mentioned, is the Passover offering. And they chose an egg because in the Aramaic language, it's pronounced be'ah. And the reason why that's important, it's to remind us that we should ask Hashem for his perseverance and to redeem us. And some people I have seen throw away the shank bone, and I don't like this. It's not nice. It's actually considered bizui mitzvah. It's disgraceful to having used it for the Seder. So what you should do is to leave it around for the next day and go ahead and eat it. That way it's given proper dignity. Halacha Zayin. The kazayas of maror that is eaten on its own, you have to dip it in its entirety in the charoses. The Mishnah Berurah adds over here that not everybody puts the whole thing in. They only put part of it in. However, you don't eat the charoses with the maror. You have to shake off the charoses. So that way you don't lose the flavor of the maror at all. And so too, when you make the Hillel sandwich or the Hillel wrap, you don't dip the entire maror in the charoses, but it's important to follow the opinion that we do dip it in the charoses at least a little bit, because we are following the opinion of Hillel, as we mentioned, because we're not sure if the halacha follows him or not. And for sure, Hillel used to dip it. And the Mishnah Berurah agrees that this is the common custom as well. Halacha 8. One should be careful that they should not say that to the roasted lamb shank that it is the actual Korban Pesach. Because some say that even if you did that by accident, you may not eat it. However, the Mishnah Berurah disagrees and says that it will be permitted to eat. And this doesn't only go for the lamb shank. This also goes for all other meat that's brought down on the table. You cannot say that it is meat for Pesach, okay? Because it sounds like you are actually identifying it as the sacrifice, and that would make it like a vow to prohibit it to yourself. However, one may say that this meat is for the holiday. Nonetheless, if it's not meat from a goat or a sheep, after the fact, that would be okay, because only those animals were brought for the Korban Pesach. We should still try to say that even if the meat is just chicken. And the Mishnah says even for fish as well. Halacha 9, there are places where they eat roasted meat on the night of Pesach. However, the Ashkenazic custom is the following. The places where they don't eat roasted meat on the first 2 nights, they can't even have a pot roast. You're not even allowed to cook it and then roast it, because this way that people shouldn't say that you were eating meat from the actual Passover offering itself, and we're eating holy items outside of the Temple Mount in Israel, in Jerusalem. And that's even if you are eating from a young cow or even chicken or other bird, anything that would have been permitted to you through shechita, through kosher slaughter. Having roasted fish and roasted eggs, it would be permitted. And there are many people who eat eggs on the night of the Seder. A reminder of the destruction of the temple, as we once used to bring the Korban Pesach, and now it is no longer. But there's no mitzvah to do this. There are some people who think that this is a big mitzvah to do that, but that's not true. And some people used to stuff themselves with eggs and not leave any room for the afikomen because they thought it was so important to eat so many eggs. Therefore, a person should be careful not to eat so much in order to leave room for afikomen. Halacha Yud, every single Jewish person is obligated to drink 4 cups of wine as a rabbinic mitzvah at both nights of the Seder. The cup that holds the wine that you're drinking should hold a revius, which is about 5 to 6 ounces. You should try to drink this drink in one shot, drinking at least the majority of the cup, even if the cup is larger than the amount that we have stated. Mishnah Berurah adds, you shouldn't take a big break, which is that you shouldn't wait more than a few minutes in between each sip of the cup to get the majority of the cup consumed. The obligation is to drink the cup. The Mishnah Berurah adds that the person can drink 1 revius, but if he can't drink a lot, he shouldn't take a giant cup, but rather a smaller cup, in order to not have to drink so much, in order to fulfill the requirement of those who say that you should drink the majority of the cup as well. So you could be lenient on a larger cup to drink no more than the revius, which is about the 5 ounces or so, but really you could drink much less than that. You just have to drink the majority of a cup that holds a revius. However, people say that you have to drink the majority of a cup, no matter what the size is. So therefore, try to take not so big a cup, especially if it's someone who is damaged or doesn't like to drink wine, and they have to really force themselves to drink the 4 cups. So therefore, take a smaller cup, he's recommending. And not only that, it also means any type of pain in the head. So if you also were to drink and you wouldn't be able to finish the Seder, this is when you should take less wine to drink. You are allowed to mix this wine with a little water, or you can drink something that is considered what's called, the words are chamar medina, meaning some type of spirit that is acceptable as a very honored and respected drink, or even raisin wine. The Mishnah Berurah adds here, what does he add? He adds a little bit of how much you can add to mix. We try not to mix so much in our day and age because a lot of the wine is already mixed with some water anyway. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says in Reish Ayin Beis in 272:15, and that's what he talks about some of those rules. So we don't really drink a whole lot. You still have to keep some of the wine flavor in there. In fact, it's so important to have wine that a person should sell his own things or even hire himself out in order to have what to drink for these 4 cups of wine. And these cups must be washed out and cleaned, and just like one would do for a cup used for birchas hamazon, for the grace after meals. However, as long as they are clean, you don't have to wash them out in between every cup. Only washing out the very first cup is the requirement. Halacha Yud Aleph. Every single Jewish person is obligated from the Torah to recite the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Specifically on the first night, that is a Torah level requirement. And on the second night, it's a rabbinic requirement. And this is an additional mitzvah above any other night, because and every single night there's a requirement to mention the Exodus from Egypt, but on this night, one is obligated to actually talk about the Exodus itself, just as it's explained in the Haggadah. Therefore, Rabbi Gamliel says, one who does not make mention of these 3 things, as it says in the Haggadah, which is to say, the reason of these 3 things, which are the Pesach matzah maror, the offering of the Passover, the eating of the unleavened bread, the matzah, and the eating of the bitter herb, one doesn't fulfill their obligation for having explained the Exodus from Egypt. If one does not have a Haggadah, one should at the very least read the attached sections in the Chumash that talk about the story of the Exodus from Egypt. A blind person is likewise obligated in the Haggadah, and when you say this matzah and this maror, the blind person should say the matzah that we eat, and from the maror that we eat. And in my opinion, the Chayei says, since you have to pick it up, he could then also say this matzah and this maror. Halachah Beis. All the mitzvos that are performed on both nights, meaning the 4 cups of wine, eating matzah, eating maror, and relating the Exodus from Egypt, both men and women are obligated to perform this. Halachah Gimel. Eating matzah and wrapping them together, and eating the afikomen at the dessert at the end of the meal, and drinking the 4 cups of wine. All these things must be done, both eating and drinking, with leaning, which means that one should tilt themselves to the left when they are doing leaning. It doesn't matter whether you are right-handed or left-handed, you always lean to the left. The Mishnah Berurah points out that if you are left-handed and you lean to the right, that's okay, because you are still leaning. However, the reason why I lean to the left is in order to not have the drinking encounter the trachea before it gets to the esophagus, so that way you don't choke. If you don't lean, and so too if you don't lean on the first 2 cups, one should eat and drink again with leaning. The Mishnah Berurah says here that if one doesn't lean at the first cup, do not drink it again. On the second cup, drink it again. And it's imperative that before one makes the blessing on the first cup, they should have the intention to go and drink between the 2 cups, because then if you err and don't lean, you could go ahead and drink again. So sometimes people only have the intent to drink just 2 cups, so you should also have in mind to drink in between in case somebody doesn't lean. That would only work for the first 2 cups, but between the last 2 cups, 3 and 4, one is not permitted to add another cup. So in those cases, we rely on those opinions who say that in our days, the obligation is nonetheless fulfilled because we don't actually lean anyway. And in my opinion, says the Chayei, so too with afikomen. If you don't lean, you're fine, because you aren't allowed to eat the afikomen twice. The Mishnah Berurah adds over here, you definitely don't have to eat again, especially if it's difficult to eat. Halacha Yud Dalet, number 14 over here. After all the eating that we eat the kazayas of matzah, from the matzah shmura, we have this thing called afikomen. It's a dessert. It's imperative to eat 2 zaysim of this. One as a remembrance for the Pesach offering, and one as a remembrance for the chagiga, for the offering that is the festival offering. One should make note to eat this not on a completely full stomach, because one should not try to force themselves to eat the afikomen, because the afikomen is eaten as remembrance of the paschal offering, of the Passover offering, which was eaten at the end. And one is not allowed to eat this offering when they are overstuffing themselves. It's also prohibited to eat and to drink after eating the afikomen, except for the last 2 cups that one must drink. The Mishnah says that water would be acceptable. And the rule is that by the 4 cups, one is not allowed to drink anything else that is something which would be an alcoholic beverage, because one has an obligation to continue telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt until they become tired. And we don't want him to continue to drink lest he become drunk. So there are exceptions he's bringing down. So he brings down apple juice, and he brings down another one over here, which is a spicy juice, and other things like tea are permitted. And if he's very thirsty after the afikomen, he can drink them. The Mishnah Berurah brings down over here that this is assuming these things do not make him drunk. You should also make sure to eat the afikomen before midnight, because Pesach is only eaten before midnight, the actual offering itself. So one should try to make sure that they also finish the Hallel as well before midnight. You should not eat the afikomen in two different places in the house, even if it's all in one house on two different tables. Just like the Karban Pesach had to be eaten in one spot, because it says, in one house should you eat it. And that's a Salach halacha, say you shouldn't walk around eating the Karban Pesach except where you got it, because it's also required that you have to be part of the group that was the part of the initial group when it was slaughtered. If you fall asleep during the Seder and wake up, or in the middle of your eating, and wake up, you do not continue eating. But if you fall asleep in the meal before you eat the afikomen, that's not a break. I should also point out that other poskim disagree about drinking anything other than water. So that's also important to mention over here. So there are people like the Chayei who are lenient, but many people still disagree with that as well. Halacha 15. If you forgot the afikomen, but you didn't bench, even though you already washed mayim acharonim, you've done, and you've already started. If there was a zimun, you had 3 adult males there, and you summoned them to start the grace after meals, the berachas hamazon. One can go ahead and still eat the afikomen without going and making another blessing of hamotzi, because you are really relying on what Hashem required you to eat that night. And literally the words are that you rely upon God's table and what God wants you to eat. So God made the menu, and therefore you don't have to worry about forgetting it. So what we forget to do is not considered having removed our intention from this meal, because this was, like I said before, a menu that God has set. If you bench and forgot afikomen, if you didn't say yet the blessing on the cup, wash your hands, say hamotzi, and eat the afikomen, say berachas hamazon again, and then say the blessing on the third cup. If you only realize it after you drank the third cup, if you are not someone who normally recites the berachas hamazon with a cup, wash your hands, say hamotzi, and eat the afikomen, and say berachas hamazon again without a cup. If you normally use a cup to say berachas hamazon with a cup, well, you have to drink another cup, and now you look like you're adding cups. So you shouldn't eat. So you shouldn't go back and eat more, and you should rely on the matzah you've eaten beforehand. If you only have one kazayas left of matzah shmura, and it was guarded, meaning it was matzah shmura from the moment it was harvested, and you haven't eaten that yet, even if you only remember after you have finished the entire Seder, wash your hands and eat a kazayas, say another blessing on a cup of wine, even though you've added more cups. You don't have to repeat Hallel again, even though you have had the cups out of order. That's okay, because drinking the cups out of order doesn't prevent you from fulfilling the mitzvah. If you lose the afikomen, eat another kazayas of matzah shmura from some other place. Okay, halacha 16. And then we'll finish this, and we'll make another video about the Seder itself. Halacha 16. If you only have 4 matzahs that are kosher for the Seder, meaning they have been guarded from becoming wet from the moment they were harvested. You should have 2 for the first Seder and 2 for the second Seder. If you have only 3 matzahs, if you think that you'll have enough matzah for the first night, then you should take 1 matzah for the first night and keep 2 matzahs for the second night, because you need lechem mishnah. You need to have 2 loaves. So hold 2 now and only eat 1, and then the next night you can eat both. And if you're not going to have enough for everybody there with just the 1, then take 1.5 the first night and have 1.5 the second night. Because some say that on the evening of Pesach, 1.5 suffices, because you really should have only 1 and 1/2, just like a poor person who wouldn't have 2 full loaves. If you only have enough to eat 2 zaysim, then all the matzah should be on that first night. You should eat that 1 zayas of matzah shmura for the bracha of al achilas matzah, and the other one you should save for the afikomen. If you have but 1 little piece of matzah that's only suffices for 1 kazayas, you should say hamotzi on other matzahs that you have that are kosher for Passover, but that were only guarded from chametz at the moment that they were mixed, or that they were ground. Many matzahs are guarded from the moment when they were mixed or ground. Most are from the moment they are ground, but not from the moment that they're harvested. But you shouldn't say the blessing of al achilas matzah. You will still say the blessing on the maror. You will also eat the Hillel sandwich, and you will use the matzah that's not shmura for that purpose. The Mishnah Berurah says is not sure whether or not you should do that. And after all of that, you say the blessing on the afikomen al achilas matzah. And this is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. And it appears to me, says the Chayei Adam, that this all applies when you don't have any other matzah to fulfill the mitzvah, because it's matzah that was not guarded from the moment it was ground. But if it was guarded from the moment it was ground, like many regular matzahs are, but it wasn't guarded from wetness from the moment it was harvested, then you should follow the opinion of the Turei Zahav, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and you should make the blessing on the kazayas of the shmura hamotzi, and also make the bracha of al achilas matzah. You should make the sandwich and the afikomen from the other matzahs. And look at my work further on this, the Nishmas Adam, which we will not get to. Someone who is ill, who cannot eat more than 1 kazayas of matzah, he should eat before all other things without hamotzi, wash his hands, say the hamotzi, and say the al achilas matzah on that 1 kazayas. But if he doesn't have wine for that, then he should also say kiddush on that bread, and then he should eat it. Halacha Zayin. If one does not have wine for the 4 cups, then he should take some other special drink that's popular and considered important in that land, even though it's still within the days of Pesach. Things like mead or honey wine. If he has not even that, then he should take some other important drink, something like a spiced drink or a fruit drink, that's considered a very impressive beverage that one would serve at a very stately meal. If you have nothing for any of these cups, then you should say the Kiddush at the beginning on the matzah and say Hamotzi and break the matzah. That means you will break the middle matzah, put one half away for the afikomen, finish the Kiddush, say the bracha al achilas matzah, and eat it, and then you will go into dipping the karpas and reciting Ma Nishtana and the entire Haggadah until Ga'al Yisrael. You will then say the blessing on the maror and eat that. You will then wrap the matzah and maror together and eat that without any other bracha. You can continue with the meal, recite Birkas HaMazon, and recite Hallel, but without adding the blessing at the end, because this blessing was meant to be recited, this blessing on Hallel was meant to be recited over a cup. However, the blessing of Asher Ga'alanu, the one who has redeemed us, is instead of the blessing of Asa Nisim, and that's how you should conduct Hallel. Mishnah Berurah adds a couple of things over here. He says that since we have 3 matzahs at the Seder, one should not break the matzahs until after the bracha at al achilas matzah, and you should break the middle matzah at the beginning of the Seder. The Mishnah Berurah also disagrees and says Hallel can be recited with the blessing at the end. And one other thing the Mishnah Berurah points out is that the blessing that is being omitted over here for concluding the Hallel, one could skip the Yishtabach blessing, but one would say the Yahalucha blessing, which is normally found at the end of Hallel. So he himself is mystified a little bit by the conclusion here of the Chayei. Based on having learned all of this, if we're dealing with someone who is not able to eat matzah and cannot drink the 4 cups, nonetheless, they should still recite the blessing of Asher Galanu at the end of Hallel. And it appears to me, says the Chayei, one should not say the words in that blessing to eat matzah and maror, but saying that really we are blessed to have reached this very night and that we should reach other things as well. If you somehow magically find something to drink for one kos, for one of the cups, use it for kiddush. If you have 2, take one for kiddush, and the other one should go at the end of the meal for Birkas HaMazon. Halacha 18. We have a custom to do something nice on the night of Pesach, to have 3 people there to respond as a zimun, as respondents, not only for Birkas HaMazon, not only for the grace after meals, but also to respond to the Hallel as well. On the sections Hodu, you should have 2 people who respond. Nonetheless, if you don't have people there, other men there, one could use their own wife or other children who live in the house, and they could respond after him. So if there's 3 of them, one of them should say Hodu, and the other 2 should respond. And if there's just 2 people, both of them should recite Hodu again. If there are 4 people in one house who could respond, then one should try to find another home to connect with that has only 2 people in it. However, one should be, even though they are saying Hallel in different houses, they shouldn't eat afikomen in different houses, because that is not allowed. One cannot eat afikomen in a different house when they started the Seder in one house. and they're not going to be included with their blessing there, with the Birchas Hamazon. He has to only say it where he ate, and you can't eat the afikomen again, because the afikomen, just like the original offering itself, can't be eaten in two places. So if you're going to be saying Birchas Hamazon in a different place, you should eat afikomen in the other house. Halacha Yates. If there are men or women in one house that don't know how to recite the Seder, or even if there's 2 or 3 houses and none of them know how to recite the Seder, one person could recite the Seder for all of them. So, meaning that person could make his own Seder, eat and say Birchas Hamazon, go to another house, say Kiddush for them, and they'll drink the cup for Kiddush. He will recite the Haggadah before them until Ga'al Yisrael, at the end of right before the second cup. They will drink the second cup, they will eat matzah, and they'll eat maror, and eat their whole meal. But he can't do any eating or drinking with them, since he has already concluded his Seder and eaten the afikomen in his own house. And that's assuming even if he hasn't eaten the afikomen in his own house, nonetheless, he should still not perform any other mitzvos in the house. It's not appropriate, because again, of the same rule of not eating in two places. So the Mishnah Berurah says that one could go ahead and eat even matzah in other places. So, but not the afikomen, not anything like that. After that, they will recite grace after meals, Birchas Hamazon. And if they don't know Birchas Hamazon, then the person leading should recite it for them, word for word. And then he can go to the second house and the third house, and he can keep doing Seders for everybody. And afterwards, he should go home and finish his Hallel and drink the 4th cup. And then he should go back to everyone else's house and finish Hallel for them as well. Another option is he should finish everything in his own house and then go to all the other houses. And a third option is they should just all go and have one big Seder together. But he doesn't have to eat with them, and then he could have the rest of the Seder at his own house. So that is the end of the laws considering the Seder. I will follow up with the short Seder rules of the Chayei Adam in another video.